Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Trondheim National Park, where we are slowing things down a little bit today with our latest species, the reindeer. Yes, the last couple of episodes have been a bit long, despite my harsh cuts to try and speed things up a bit. So I'm happy to say this one is a bit simpler, although no less scenic. As we climb ever higher on this Norwegian mountainside, we're getting a little bit more creative with the space at our disposal. There's a nice flat area up here with some natural peaks that act as barriers, so we've made the most of these for today's habitat. For another deer species, the deceptively small reindeer. I don't know why I always assumed these were maybe not moose size, but you know, perhaps large enough to ride. They're actually quite small, which is adorable, but I definitely made the enclosure too large with this in mind. Seems to be a bit of a theme for our deer species. I suppose if nothing else it means we can keep more of each species towards their maximum group size instead of, you know, one male, 2 or 3 females. You'll see that I'm taking advantage of this mountainous terrain not only to create a more interesting landscape for the animals, but also to decorate the staff buildings. I'd rather have a cool Erebor style mountain entrance than another wooden shack, so I'm now burying my staff facilities under the mountain. I've gone to great lengths to decorate these entrances to this tunnel? Staff tunnel? I haven't seen them without snow yet, so I don't know if they actually look okay or not, but I did record some of that, so I think I'm going to add that to the bonus episode. You will see it pretty well in this video though. As I was saying, I've gone to over 30 minutes for the last 2 episodes, which is okay now and then, but not ideal for every episode, so I'm taking a bit of a more relaxed approach to this habitat. I decided to reuse the basic barn that was built for the moose, but with a couple of modifications. The reindeer are obviously smaller, so we don't need the doors to be as tall, which means we can move the entrance to the side. Nothing too tricky, although I did faff around with it a bit. There's a lot of edits I did that have been cut out because I essentially ended up undoing it all. Thankfully it was also built with smaller pieces, so it came apart nicely without needing too much rebuilding. I did consider shrinking it slightly, but I don't think it would have been worth it, especially as we can now add quite a few animals to this area. I also didn't want it to be just a copy of the other barn, so I changed the colour slightly to make it darker, and I gave it more wear and dirt with the decals, as I imagine it would be harder to maintain at elevation. That's probably not true, but it's what we're going with. The nice thing about these barns is they don't need a massive amount of change to give a different effect, but the consistency that you get from reusing structures starts to create a theme that the whole zoo can follow. The Highland Reserve was a bit patchwork in that every habitat was built in isolation. Apart from the woodland area in the later episodes, there was no consistency to the buildings or the layouts. We used the same plants a lot of the time, so it wasn't completely different, but the construction was very much dependent on the animal. Here I feel like a theme has started to take hold. A lot of the dark wood and stone. I want to say it's more of a traditional Norwegian style, but that would be complete waffle. It feels very simple, something that could have been achieved 100 years ago in much the same style. And as I said in one of the other videos, the dark colouring against the white snow helps everything stand out nicely with a lot of contrast. I'm trying, as much as possible anyway, to build when there is no snow. I say as much as possible because the clear seasons are few and far between. I know it'll look good in the snow regardless, so there's no point in doing too much. One thing I was really noticing with the foliage in this enclosure was the mix of colour. I mean, we're not working with a broad spectrum to begin with, mostly yellow and green, but the mix is really appealing. It scratches a part of my brain nicely. It helps a lot that there are no foliage limits for the reindeer, so I could sort of go bananas again. This zoo has been great in that respect so far. This enclosure follows the same line of thinking as the moose habitat. As much as is available, we've used the steep cliff sides as natural barriers, as I said. I've had to fence off a couple of areas, as the trees are not as dense up here, primarily because the guest viewing area is quite narrow, so we need some good sight lines all the way through. One of the benefits of greater number of animals in this enclosure is that the depth has less effect on the visibility, because the reindeer are everywhere. The foliage does get a bit thicker towards the rear, but this habitat has been built through a small access area across the top of the mountain, so it's not grown into the centre quite yet. The front, where the guests can see the clearest, is all very open, and the reindeer do spend a good mix of time between the open and the safety of the trees, so the guests get a good look at them. The first night I had all the reindeer in properly with all the needs met, they all gathered in the barn together to sleep. I don't know if that's a behavioural mechanic or just a coincidence, but I'm very disappointed I didn't record it. It was a very wholesome moment. At the time of editing and recording the voiceover, I think all of the females are pregnant, but none of the babies have been born yet, so I don't know yet if this habitat is baby-proof. I might have to fast forward a bit to get a clip for the cinematics at the end, otherwise there may be some hastily built blocking to seal up any holes in the next episode. Obviously, with a lot of bare cliff face exposed around the enclosure, there's going to be a lot of rock work. I've spared you having to watch all of it, as it can get a bit repetitive as a spectator, but some of the techniques are quite interesting. I find that the rocks, while adding shape and texture, are quite noticeably separate pieces. It's hard to describe, I guess, but for instance, I used some of the larger rocks on full random rotation to border the small pool that's up here, and it looks very much like a series of large rocks rather than a consistent rock face. You know what I mean? I've started taking some of these flatter cladding pieces and sinking them into the rocks to fill in some of the gaps with a flat but textured surface. And I think that does a good job of pulling everything together. And then on the other end, using the faux rocks as the small loose rubble pieces on the flat areas. It's a lot of extra attention to detail, but I think it's worth it in the end. For the foliage, there's a bit of a continuation going from the moose habitat throughout the zoo. I'm not looking too closely at the region of the plants, but the biomes are what makes a difference. Plants need to be able to survive here, so a lot of the same trees and grasses are being used throughout. I don't know why I have such a great love of pines, but when I think of a European forest, that's the kind of silhouette I picture. The sharp peaks at the top of the trees lining the mountainsides. Now, I'm using a lot of different types of pines to give a broader, more varied appeal with more shape and colours. I don't know if that makes a lot of sense. Probably not, with lots of different regional types, but it definitely looks better. Then, as I said earlier, I tried to use a few different grasses and bushes to create a mix of colours and coverage. Again, not a lot of medium to large bushes that aren't trees, so it's all quite low. which in this instance is not the worst thing, as it helps with the sightlines. And I can sink the pines like we did in the lynx cage, as they look okay still, so when some smaller coverage is needed, it can be found. I also used a lot of the fallen trees again, not as much to block escape this time, as I ended up using proper fences, just as a nice visual element. I found, particularly with some of the shorter grasses, it's kind of obvious where they end, so I'm really trying to layer the borders with lower and lower sunk grass so that it tapers out rather than just there's grass and then nothing. Means a lot of coverage that's barely noticeable, but coverage is not a problem here, and the difference with and without is quite significant. It looks almost barren without it. Once again, I've put a couple of those scratching posts around trees. I think that'll be a standard thing from now on. I've used some muted colours, but I'm not trying to hide them or camouflage them or anything. I just would rather have the habitat itself be the most visually noticeable thing. If you put something bright red and blue in with lots of greens and yellows, it draws a lot of attention. These, I think it's the Himalayan pines, are perfect for these. There's a long straight trunk that is mostly bare at the bottom, so there's no branches sticking out, it doesn't bend through it. I imagine there will be animals that don't have as good a tree, so I might have to get imaginative at some point. I think eventually there will be something on the other side of this habitat. Over the back fence, that is. There's some good space up here. I've also started the path wrapping around the dividing peak, so there'll be something there on that side too, but next week's animal is a little harder to place. I haven't quite found a good place for it yet. But once that's in, the last of the 4 species in holding, I will go through and put some effort into the connecting areas to fill some of the gaps a bit. I think that is all for today's voiceover, at least. There's still the cinematics to go at the end, so make sure you stick around for those. Thank you for joining me again this week. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I will see you again next Friday.